Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 19, 2023. A funeral service for the late Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman to serve on the High Court. President Joe Biden calling Justice O'Connor a daughter of the American West, a pioneer in her own right, breaking down the barriers in the legal and political worlds and the nation's consciousness. There were also eulogies from Chief Justice John Roberts, biographer Evan Thomas, and her son, Jay O'Connor. U.S. Senate leaders say they're even more optimistic with every passing day that a deal on immigration and border security can be reached that can be attached to the president's request for aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. But both the Democratic and Republican leaders say more time is needed to reach that agreement. A White House spokesperson, John Kirby, talks about the latest steps to confront Houthi rebels who have been attacking ships in the Red Sea, they say in response to Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. United Nations Security Council working on a new resolution to allow more humanitarian aid to flow into Gaza. It's not calling for a ceasefire because the U.S. previously vetoed a resolution with that language, but they're trying to come up with new words that can pass, perhaps suspension of hostilities. Also an update on Christmas holiday travel in the U.S. from Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker. And the U.S. Senate confirms Martin O'Malley, former Maryland governor, a Democrat, as the new commissioner of the Social Security Administration. And we begin at Washington National Cathedral and the funeral service for former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who died earlier this month at age 93. ABC News writes she made history when she was appointed as the first woman to the nation's highest court in 1981 by then-President Ronald Reagan. In her 25 years on the bench, she was known for her congeniality and independence. She authored landmark opinions upholding abortion access, affirmative action, and on protections to the First Amendment. She was also one of the 5 justices who decided to end Florida's recount in the 2000 election between George W. Bush and Al Gore. President Joe Biden was one of the eulogists.
Equal justice under law is the noblest aspiration of humankind, and the aspiration of Sandra Day O'Connor, one that she pursued her whole life. The last justice to have held elective office, she was especially conscious of the law's real impact on people's lives. One need not agree with all her decisions in order to recognize that her principles were deeply held and of the highest order, and that her desire for civility was genuine, and her trust in the capacity of human institutions to make life better is what this world was abiding. And how she embodied such attributes under such pressure and scrutiny helped empower generations of women in every part of American life, including the court itself, helping to open doors, secure freedoms, and prove that a woman can not only do anything a man can do, but many times do it a heck of a lot better. Excuse my language, Father.
President Biden at the Sandra Day O'Connor funeral service at Washington National Cathedral. Again, from the ABC News article, President Biden was seated in the front row at the cathedral alongside administration officials, including Acting Labor Secretary Julie Su and Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines. O'Connor's family was also seated in the front row, and behind them were the 9 current Supreme Court justices. Also reported there, retired Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy. The 2 other living former justices were not present, David Souter and Stephen Breyer. Chief Justice John Roberts also gave a eulogy, speaking about the 6 months that he and Justice O'Connor served together on the court and about Justice O'Connor's legacy. He said, for her, at the court, it was simple and direct. Get it done.
The last several weeks after Justice O'Connor's passing, I have spoken with many women judges and lawyers who were young adults when Justice O'Connor became the first. They say the same thing. Younger people today cannot understand what it was like before Justice O'Connor in what now seems a distant past. That distance is a measure of time, but is also a measure of Justice O'Connor's life and work. In nearly a quarter century on the court, she was a strong, influential, and iconic jurist. Her leadership shaped the legal profession, making it obvious that judges are both women and men. The time when women were not on the bench seemed so far away because Justice O'Connor was so good when she was on the bench. She was so successful that the barriers she broke down are almost unthinkable today. But not so in her lifetime. Sandra Day O'Connor had to study and launch a career in the law when most men in the established profession did not want women lawyers, let alone judges. She had to find her own style to cajole, persuade, and unite colleagues when there was no example to follow for the first female Senate leader in the country. She had to ignore slights and work to bring people together in social, professional, and political life. She had to demonstrate excellence as the 102nd member of the Supreme Court, all the while setting a model as the first woman on the job. She had to fight cancer and Alzheimer's in public ways that helped others and that promoted dignity and respect. She had to speak and teach and inspire through the country and around the world about the necessity of judicial independence so our generation and the next would have a roadmap to safeguard it with all the gifts God has given us. She had to be both the most important woman in government and also a devoted wife who, with her devoted husband, John, raised 3 sons of whom they were so very proud. All this and more she had to do, and she got it done.
Chief Justice John Roberts at the funeral service for former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor at Washington National Cathedral. John Roberts said that he first encountered Sandra Day O'Connor during her confirmation in 1981 when he was working in the Reagan administration's Justice Department, helping her prepare. And as for President Biden, who also gave a eulogy today, he was the top Democrat on the Judiciary Committee that approved the O'Connor nomination, and the full Senate then voted to confirm her 99-0. Evan Thomas is the author of a 2019 biography of Sandra Day O'Connor titled First, Sandra Day O'Connor, an intimate portrait of the first woman Supreme Court justice. He spoke at today's funeral about how Justice O'Connor worked hard to foster a better working and personal relationship among the justices on the court.
When Sandra Day O'Connor arrived at the U.S. Supreme Court, she found the place to be cold, and not just because she missed the Arizona sun. At the court's weekly lunches, only about half the justices showed up. So she made it her business to make the justices come to lunch, not to talk about cases or argue over the law, but to get to know each other. If they didn't go to lunch, she would go to their chambers and just sit there until they did. When Justice Clarence Thomas came on the court, he later told me, he didn't much feel like going to lunch. But after conference, Justice O'Connor would walk with him down the hallway saying, "Clarence, you need to come to lunch." So finally, as he told me, I started going to lunch. He felt he belonged. He said, "She was the glue. The reason this place was civil was Sandra Day O'Connor."
Evan Thomas, author, journalist, historian, biographer of Sandra Day O'Connor at today's funeral. Also giving a tribute today, one of her sons, Jay, who remembered his mother as a force of nature who drew people in, took interest in them, and made them feel special. He also said that her ability to ask pointed questions to attorneys during high court oral argument was fine-tuned at home.
We had lots of interesting conversations around the dinner table. And of course, my mom asked probing questions. On the court, as Chief Justice Roberts just explained, she was known for always asking the first questions at oral arguments, searing questions that cut to the heart of the case. Where do you think she developed those world-class interrogation skills? Once she arrived at the Supreme Court? Hardly. she finally honed those techniques from years of grilling her 3 sons about what time we had come home on Saturday night. To the trial attorneys of America, you're welcome. What were our mom's maxims for us as kids? The sayings that she drilled into us over and over again. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. Get it done. Does that sound familiar, Chief? And her most repeated command of all, don't hit your brother. And amazingly, these very maxims were some of the exact same strategies she used to make herself so successful in life and on the Supreme Court. I'm serious. Don't hit your brother was the first lesson in her own philosophy that she taught us over time, to not lash out at anyone, even your opponent, and to treat everyone with kindness and respect. This approach allowed her to navigate every situation with grace and goodwill.
Jay O'Connor, son to former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, at the funeral service today at Washington National Cathedral. He also spoke about how his mother and his father loved to dance.
Mom and Dad absolutely loved to dance, and they were known as the best dancers in Washington. In this city, it was not uncommon for the dance floor to clear the moment they stepped onto it hand in hand. They were that good. In the late 70s in Arizona, they actually took lessons in disco dancing. Quick survey of the justices of the Supreme Court here with us today. Raise your hand if you have received technical training in disco dancing. That's what I thought. My mom is the first person on the Supreme Court with technical training in disco dancing.
Jay O'Connor. He also said that in the 1980s, his mother wrote out a letter to her 3 sons that was not to be opened until just before her death. It included her wishes for her funeral held at the Washington National Cathedral today with the theme Justice on Earth, and also desired to have her remains returned to her ranch in Arizona. And he said it included the lines, "Our purpose in life is to help others along the way. May you each try to do the same." This is Washington Today. A story from Reuters. Leaders of the U.S. Senate on Tuesday said a deal to provide additional aid to Ukraine and bolster U.S. border security was not likely to come together soon, with one senior Democrat saying that action would probably be postponed until January. Republican and Democratic negotiators have been working to pass a funding package before leaving town for a year-end holiday break. Senator Dick Durbin, the number 2 Democrat, said that was not likely. He told reporters, "I hope that they're going to prepare the text and sit down and roll up their sleeves and finish up as soon as we get back in January." The chamber's top Democrat and Republican said the talks were productive, but would not be completed anytime soon. That reporting from Reuters. Here is Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader, speaking to reporters at a news conference.
With regard to the border discussion, I think it's pretty safe to say that we've made some significant progress, but we obviously aren't there. But that needs to be a part of this overall request from the administration, which remains extremely important. I think this is the most dangerous time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. You have the first land war in Europe since World War II. We still have terrorist threats, not only in Israel, but some of the kinds of people that are getting into the United States. And we want to help Taiwan as well. So no question, this package is extremely important. The most complicated part of it, actually, is the border. I think we haven't passed a significant immigration bill since Reagan's second term. And so this is not easy, but we're working hard to get an outcome because the country needs it, and the country needs it soon.
Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, with reporters today at a separate news conference. The Senate Majority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York, also giving an update on the U.S. border security talks. and how anything that comes out of that would be added to the president's national security supplemental spending package, more than $100 billion for Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel.
The bottom line, both Democrats and Republicans understand that there's more work to do to pass legislation protecting America's security and the security of the Western world. This week, we made important progress, with a special thanks to Senators Murphy and Sinema for their dogged work with Senator Lankford. Negotiations aren't easy. We know it's going to take more time, but I am significantly more optimistic today than I was Thursday when we left, based on the negotiations that have occurred all weekend. We have only one option. We have to succeed. The stakes are too high for America, for Europe, for the Middle East, for the world. We have to send more aid to Ukraine to defeat Putin. We know how. This is a historic moment, as I have said. History will look back if we don't support our ally in Ukraine and regard it as a major negative turning point for the U.S. and the Western world. We know how important that is. We also know that Republicans and Democrats have to continue our negotiation on the border. We have to send aid to Israel. We have to send critical aid to humanitarian aid to innocent civilians in Gaza. As the past few weeks have been clear, Democrats have been willing to engage in good faith, realistic negotiations about border security. We agree the border must be fixed. That is a broad consensus in our caucus. Finding common ground, of course, is difficult, one of the most difficult issues Congress has faced. This has been an intractable issue. The last major bipartisan effort on immigration occurred when Senator McCain and I led the Gang of Eight back in 2013. So I know how hard it is. But the details in this matter immensely, because this is not a topic that Congress has tackled in many years. So we know that. We know that this is going to be not easy to do. But we know, too, that we must get it done. And while we've made important progress over the past week on border security, everyone agrees on both sides that it takes more time. Leader McConnell and I are both more optimistic than before. I think he said something to that effect when he was here a few minutes ago. So it's not going to be easy, as I said, but we have to do it. We must succeed. Democrats, myself, remain totally committed to working with our Republican counterparts to reach an agreement.
Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, majority leader at a news conference today on the talks on U.S. border security, again, expected to be added, should a deal come out of it, to the president's $100 billion request for aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan to be passed as one bill. Some updates today on Russia's war in Ukraine from Associated Press. Ukraine's military wants to mobilize up to 500,000 more troops to fight Russia's invasion. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Tuesday that he has asked them to spell out their plans in detail on what is a very sensitive matter before deciding whether he grants their wish as the war approaches the 2-year mark. Zelensky spoke at a year-end news conference. And Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said his country's endorsement of Sweden's NATO membership will depend on U.S. congressional approval to sell F-16 fighter jets to Turkey. He's quoted by the state-run Turkish news agency. Positive developments from the United States regarding the F-16 issue and Canada keeping its promises will accelerate our parliament's positive view on Sweden's membership. All of these are linked. Back to the U.S. border security issue from NBC News, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, on Monday signed legislation that makes it a criminal offense to enter the state illegally, setting up a potential clash with President Joe Biden's administration over immigration policy and border enforcement. Abbott, who has implemented other policies directed at migrants that have drawn court challenges, signed the bill at an event in Brownsville, Texas. Here is Governor Abbott taking a question.
What is your message to some of the residents of Brownsville who are worried that there could be some side effects to these laws that could lead to profiling or improper detention of law-abiding citizens and their loved ones?
So one thing that officers understand, and that is wrong to profile. The goal of these laws is to make sure that when they see somebody crossing over the border, as the National Guard see, as the Texas Department of Public Safety see, they know that they're not profiling. They are seeing with their own eyes people who are violating the law. And now they're going to have the ability to arrest them and prosecute them, make them subject to jail, make them subject to being sent back, and then make them subject to even greater penalties if they dare come into Texas a second time. So the only thing we are doing by this law is making sure that our law enforcement have the tools they need to actually take action against those who are actually coming across the border illegally.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott at a news conference and a bill signing in Brownsville, Texas on Monday. The law does make it a misdemeanor to enter or attempt to enter Texas from a foreign country at any location other than a lawful port of entry, and it's punishable by up to 180 days in jail and a fine of $2,000. Illegal re-entry would become a felony, punishable by up to 20 years in jail, depending upon the circumstances. The law says no arrest could take place in certain places, including schools, houses of worship, or health care facilities, and it's scheduled to go into effect in March. There has already been a lawsuit against it from private organizations, and the Justice Department is considering suing as well. Here is the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at today's news conference in Washington.
Question on the new immigration law in Texas. Does White House have any thoughts on that law? And there appears to be some litigation that's starting over the law as well.
Look, this is an extreme law that will not and does not make the communities in Texas safer. It just doesn't. And I think to add to that is that it is very much in line with what Republicans, many Republicans like to do or tend to do, which is demonize immigrants and also dehumanize immigrants. This is part of this. And so this is not who we are as a country. This is not who we should be as a country. Communities should not be individually targeted and put into harm's way. And this is what we're seeing. Again, this is something that Governor Abbott has done over and over again. There are plenty of examples that I've listed out from here before, whether it's leaving migrants in the side of the road in the middle of winter, installed razor wire near the border, making it more dangerous for Border Patrol to do their jobs, and placed bayous in the river, making it harder for Border Patrol to do their jobs as well. So this is certainly extreme as we see it, and it is incredibly unfortunate, but this is what we see from particular Republicans trying to dehumanize a group of people who are coming here, or some of them trying to migrate here, and they're putting them in harm's way.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre at her news conference in the White House briefing room. An article from CBS News adds that the law would also allow Texas magistrates to order migrants suspected of committing the new illegal entry or re-entry crimes to return to Mexico as an alternative to continuing their prosecution. How Texas would enforce these de facto deportation orders remains unclear, as only the federal government has the facilities, agents, and international agreements needed to deport migrants to foreign countries. That was from CBS News. And Reuters adding that the Mexican president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said his government was preparing to challenge the new Texas law allowing state law enforcement to arrest suspected migrants, which he calls inhumane. This is Washington Today. Great Britain has also been debating immigration and border security. The government of the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has proposed what is called the Rwanda Plan, where people seeking asylum in Great Britain would be sent to the country of Rwanda in Southeast Africa for processing. And if they're successful in claiming asylum, they would stay in Rwanda. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak of the Conservative Party, was asked today about it during a testimony before the British House of Commons Liaison Committee. Here are the questions from Member of Parliament Diana Johnson of the rival Labour Party.
Question to you, which is about the pledge you made to stop the boats. So when will you have stopped the boats?
What's
the date for that?
Well, the first thing to say is we have made progress. and that is that the numbers this year are down by a third, which is considerable
They're still
progress.
the second highest on record, though, aren't they, this year?
They are, for the first ever time, down.
They're still the second highest, but what is the date?
Well, there isn't a firm date on this because I've always been clear from the beginning.
You said you're going to stop the boat, so I just want to know
and
what
we will
the date
keep
is.
going until we do.
Okay.
This is not one of these things where there's a precise date.
You don't have a date?
This is something where, before I took this job, they had only ever gone up.
Okay.
And now they're down by a third. And an important part of finishing the job is having a deterrent for everybody.
Well, can I come on to that? Can I come on to that? Because that's the Rwanda policy. So you've said that you want to see planes take off by the spring to Rwanda. That's one of the things you've said. Now, I understand that no airline is willing to actually contract with government to remove people to Rwanda because of reputational damage. Is that correct? There isn't an airline that you've got lined up to remove people?
I think we are, in terms of timing, I'd say I want to get flights off as soon as practically possible.
You need some planes to do that.
We do, but we also need to be able to pass the legislation through Parliament first.
But on the plane point, which I'm asking you specifically about, do you have an airline that's ready to go?
I'm confident we will have the ability to send people to Rwanda. But
you
there
don't
are
have
many
an airline.
steps. Again, you wouldn't expect me to comment on commercial conversations that are necessarily private, but I'm highly confident that we can operationalise the bill in all its aspects.
Okay.
That's not just about flights. There's many different steps that you need, but the legislation needs to get through Parliament first.
Okay, so we're not
and
clear.
as quickly as it passes, then we will work
we're not
to
clear if
operationalise the bill.
any airlines. Okay.
Question to the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak by Member of Parliament Diana Johnson. At today's Liaison Committee hearing in the House of Commons in London, that committee is comprised of chairs of other committees in Commons. Story from the Washington Post out of Yemen. Yemen's Houthi militants said Tuesday they will not stop their military operations in the Red Sea, hours after the United States announced the formation of a multinational naval coalition to protect commercial shipping there. The Yemeni group, that's aligned with Iran, has been targeting commercial ships in protest over the Israel-Gaza war, disrupting one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Our war is a moral war, and therefore, no matter how many alliances America mobilizes, our military operations will not stop, said the organization's ruling council member to the Washington Post. John Kirby, a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council, talked about this at today's White House briefing.
The United States and the world's largest flag states for commercial vessels transiting the Red Sea also issued a joint statement condemning in the strongest terms the threats and the acts by the Houthis. This joint statement has 44 signatories, including NATO, the entire EU and G7, as well as Australia, Canada, Bahamas, Malta, New Zealand, Singapore, and Yemen. Secretary Austin also convened in the region a meeting with ministers, chiefs of defense, senior representatives from 43 countries, as well as the European Union and NATO to discuss what we're doing in response to this increased threat. Now, I think it's important to put it a little bit in perspective. Some 6 countries border the Red Sea. The Red Sea is a conduit for 10 to 15% of all global trade, 8% of global grain trade, and 12% of global seaborne oil trade. Of this total Red Sea trade, Greek, Chinese, Japanese, and German-owned vessels make up 40 to 50% of transits. All that underscores the dependence that these economies have around the world on the strategic trade. Bottom line is, these attacks have to stop. They need to stop. They're unacceptable. The United States, our allies and our partners, will do what we have to do to counter these threats and to protect these ships. And with that, let me take some questions.
Administration thought about redesignating the Houthis as a terrorist organization?
Yeah, we're actually conducting a review right now on whether that's the right course forward. We've talked about that. No decisions made right now. I don't have a timeline for you, but we are reviewing that designation as we speak.
And one more question. There are some unnamed countries that are currently involved in the Red Sea initiative. Can you say more about why those countries don't want to be named? And is it a sign that countries don't want to be seen standing with the United States at this moment, in the region?
There are some nations that have agreed to participate and to be a part of this, but they get to decide. They're sovereign nations. They get to decide how public they want that to be, and I'll leave it up to them to be able to describe it one way or another. Since because not all want to become public, I doubt you're going to get much more out of them.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council at today's White House News Conference. Country ambassadors on the United Nations Security Council have been in negotiations over a new resolution that would allow more humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. Original language was to call for a cessation of hostilities, but reportedly that may be changed to suspension of hostilities, in an effort to keep the United States from vetoing the resolution. The U.S. vetoed a previous resolution that called for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The ambassador of the United Arab Emirates to the United Nations, Lana Nusabai, spoke to reporters.
The focus and the priority is for a resolution that has real impact on the ground, on the devastating humanitarian situation in Gaza. This is a humanitarian resolution that asks us to scale up access, open all entry points, ensure Kerem Shalom is open, and ensure that Egypt has the support it needs from the United Nations in the form of a mechanism to help streamline the process of monitoring aid. So that's the intention of the resolution. It is humanitarian in nature, but I think is a very important one. Of course, overriding all of this, humanitarian actors cannot deliver aid safely if they are not protected by the normal rules of deconfliction. So we have been looking at that language very, very carefully to make sure that in this conflict, like any conflict around the world, aid workers do not die in the course of their duties. That's sticking points? Sticking points is the nature of how to deconflict in a resolution and to create that deconfliction space. Of course, we're building on Resolution 2712 and we need to go a little bit further. Ultimately, the end point is a ceasefire, but as you know, that was not adopted recently, so we have to move to the space that allows humanitarian workers to work safely and at scale.
And Ambassador, the resolution mentions that the PA...
Yes, of course, that's a strong point. I think that is a political signal for the future, for the day after, as people have been discussing, that the day after involves a serious return to the two-state solution and that the PA must assume the responsibility for the West Bank and Gaza. So I think a lot of key messages in this resolution, which is why the negotiations are complex, but we hope to see the Council speak with one voice today.
The ambassador to the United Nations from United Arab Emirates, Lana Nusabai, with reporters at the UN in New York City. Israel's President Isaac Herzog told an Atlantic Council event that C-SPAN covered today that Israel is willing to have another humanitarian pause in the war in Gaza in exchange for the release of hostages by Hamas. But a senior official for Hamas in a statement today said, "We affirm our position of categorically rejecting to hold any form of negotiations over prisoners exchange under the continuing Israeli genocidal war. We are, however, open to any initiative that contributes to ending the aggression of our people and opening the crossings to bring in aid and provide relief to the Palestinian people." Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. AAA expects 115 million people will be traveling 50 miles or more from home during the Christmas and New Year's holiday travel season. Most will go by car, but 7.5 million will be flying. Today, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg and Federal Aviation Administration Administrator Michael Whitaker held a news conference at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Administrator Whitaker said his agency is ready.
We are preparing for a busy holiday travel season. Our safety teams will work around the clock so passengers are safe from takeoff to touchdown. I've been on the job for 8 weeks, and my focus has been almost exclusively on safety, starting with the Independent Safety Review Team report, which examined ways to enhance safety and reliability throughout our national airspace. We've already taken action on several recommendations. Effective 2 weeks ago, the head of the Air Traffic Safety Oversight Organization now reports directly to me. We are filling every seat at the Air Traffic Control Academy in Oklahoma City. We're expanding the use of advanced training across the country with new facilities in Chicago and San Diego, and soon also in Nashua and Phoenix. We're working with aeronautical colleges and universities to move graduates quickly to on-the-job training from those facilities. And we're deploying tower simulator systems in 95 facilities over the next 2 years. The first system will be deployed next month in Austin, Texas. We know we need more air traffic controllers. We're working hard to hire from a variety of sources and keep them moving through the training pipeline. As the Chief Recruitment Officer for the agency, I want to let everyone know that in early spring, we will be starting to take applications for the general public to go to our air traffic control center in Oklahoma City. These are great jobs. They're not easy jobs, but they're important and very rewarding jobs. So we're looking forward to expanding the pipeline there. So tell your kids, your nieces, your nephews, and look for more information on our website, faa.gov. I also want to take a moment to thank the controllers who will be working throughout the holiday season to make sure that everyone gets to their destination safely, just like they did so successfully over Thanksgiving. In addition to their hard work, we're taking additional steps to keep traffic safe and smooth over these holidays. We've opened military airspace that will be available for moving north-south traffic on the East Coast. We're cooperating with the commercial space industry to limit launches during peak travel season. And we've also opened up this year 169 additional East Coast routes to accommodate more traffic.
FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker at a news conference at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport, just across the river from Washington, D.C. He was joined by the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who said we may see some bad weather around the holidays, and that could cause flight delays. But he said while airlines cannot control the weather, there is what he calls a tipping point where they can prevent additional cancellations and delays, and he wants to hold them accountable for those disruptions. Secretary Buttigieg highlighted the record fine announced Monday against Southwest Airlines.
We also remember what happened about 1 year ago, around Christmas of 2022, when Southwest canceled about 17,000 flights and left millions of people impacted by that, hundreds of thousands of them stranded. Some people here probably experienced that firsthand. At the time, I made clear that we would be putting Southwest under a microscope. And since that time, we have engaged to determine what they are doing to prevent that from happening again, to look over their shoulder as they have reimbursed impacted passengers with hundreds of millions of dollars, and to conduct an investigation to hold them accountable for those failures and send a signal to the rest of the airline industry. That investigation is now complete, and yesterday we announced that Southwest will pay $35 million in direct cash penalties as part of a $140 million total penalty, which is by far the largest that this department has ever ordered, on top of about $600 million in refunds and reimbursements for passengers. On top of the $35 million, we are requiring Southwest to deliver $90 million to compensate future passengers whose flights are affected by controllable cancellations and delays. These steps are designed to send a message to the airline sector that if you fail to take care of passengers, our department will hold you accountable.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg at a news conference at Reagan National Airport. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 251, Nasdaq up 98, S&P up 27. At Financial Times, Nippon Steel's $14.9 billion purchase of U.S. Steel is facing a bipartisan political backlash in Washington, with prominent lawmakers vowing to scrutinize the deal and have it blocked by the Biden administration on national security grounds. On Tuesday, 3 Republican senators sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen asking for the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., which vets international takeovers, to launch a review of the deal. CFIUS, as it's known, can and should block the acquisition of U.S. Steel by NSC, a company whose allegiances clearly lie with a foreign state and whose record in the United States is deeply flawed, wrote J.D. Vance of Ohio, Josh Hawley of Missouri, and Marco Rubio of Florida. The Treasury declined to comment on the letter. The proposed takeover is also facing some resistance from across the aisle. Summer Lee, a Democratic member of Congress from Pennsylvania, where U.S. Steel is based, said she felt blindsided and concerned by the agreement. That was from Financial Times. Senator John Fetterman, Democrat from Pennsylvania, posted a video.
I'm standing on the roof of my home right here in Braddock, Pennsylvania, right across the street from the Edgar Thompson plant. And I just have to say it's absolutely outrageous that they have sold themselves to a foreign nation and a company. Can't do that. Steel is always about security as well, too. and I am committed to doing anything I can do from using my platform or my position in order to block this. And I'm going to fight for the steel workers and their union way of life here as well, too, and we cannot ever allow them to be screwed over or left behind.
Senator John Fetterman in a video. More from the Financial Times article. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, declined to comment specifically on the potential sale of U.S. Steel, noting it could be subject to regulatory review. But President Biden supported steel workers' commitment to protecting American manufacturers that supports sustaining union jobs, she said. The president is committed to competition because he knows competition means lower costs for consumers and higher wages for workers. That's incredibly important. That from Financial Times. Politico reports the Senate late Monday confirmed former Democratic presidential candidate and Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley to lead the Social Security Administration amid extremely weak attendance. The vote was 50-11, with 39 senators absent for the chamber's first vote the week before Christmas as lawmakers continue working on an international aid and border security supplemental package. Longtime Senate reporters and procedural experts called it the worst attendance for a vote that they could recall for at least the last 2 decades. That was reporting from Politico. Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, spoke in favor of the Martin O'Malley nomination right before the vote Monday.
Social Security Administration is confronting a consumer service crisis. Today, SSA is serving 50% more customers and beneficiaries with the same staffing it had in 1995. This has resulted in unacceptable service delays, including 37-minute average hold times on the 800 number and as much as a 2-year waiting for disability determinations and appeals. The American people deserve better. Recall that about 66 million Americans, 1 in 5, receive some benefits from Social Security each year. Governor Martin O'Malley is the strong operational leader that the Social Security Administration needs right now. He has the demonstrated time and time again that by focusing on performance management, smart government, and data-driven results, he can bring change and accountability to large organizations and significantly improve government service for the American people. His leadership credentials include decades of public service, including 2 terms each as mayor of Baltimore and then governor of Maryland. I saw his hands-on approach firsthand as a longtime Baltimore resident. I was at City Hall when Governor O'Malley set up the city stats when he was mayor. This is a novel approach I'd never seen really carried out by a chief executive of a city. He brought his agency heads in on a regular basis with specific objectives that they needed to accomplish. And then on a regular basis, he had the statistics to see whether they were performing as they should, as they indicated they needed to. That's called accountability. He held his team accountable, and the results were incredible. His signature city stat and state stat initiatives are widely cited as a model for data-driven government efficiency and effectiveness, and won Baltimore the Innovation in Government Awards from the Harvard Kennedy School in 2004.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, on the Senate floor Monday, right before the vote to confirm Martin O'Malley as commissioner of the Social Security Administration, and he was confirmed 50-11. Washington Post reporting on this writes that the Social Security Administration has been without a confirmed secretary since July 2021, nearly 2 years after President Biden fired Trump administration holdover Andrew Saul. Saul, whose 6-year term was scheduled to end in January 2025, previously clamped down on benefits eligibility and took an uncompromising anti-union stance. O'Malley's confirmation on Monday was to fill the remainder of Saul's term. That reporting from Washington Post. And thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. The newsletter is free. Have a good night.